When I first started this channel, finding good resources for learning European Portuguese felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. Everything was either Brazilian Portuguese, too academic, or just plain outdated. Forward to 2025 and wow, things have changed. There is now a ton of content out there, which is amazing, but also a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're just getting started. I know a lot of you are either preparing to move or you've already landed in Portugal and you're quickly realizing that Google Translate just isn't going to cut it when you're trying to book a doctor's appointment or chat to your neighbors or even understand the menu at your local restaurant. So in this video, I am cutting through the noise and sharing the top resources that are actually worth your time, whether you are starting from scratch or finally ready to take your Portuguese to the next level. All of these are tried and tested and highly recommended by my own students inside the Portuguese Pro program. They're working with me to go from saying their very first words up to having their first conversations with native speakers. And if you're interested in joining us, I do have a free taster lesson waiting for you in the description. Just click to register and kickstart your conversation skills today. Let's start with books. So let's kick off with what I consider to be the foundation of your Portuguese skills. If you're a fan of this channel, you know that I talk about this a lot, and that is your pronunciation. And a brilliant way to practice this is through reading simple books out loud. So one awesome recommendation from my student Jenny was to visit your local library if you're already in Portugal and visit the children's section. You'll be able to pick out several books that will be nice and simple for you to get started with, and you can then progress through the ages to keep challenging yourself. Something people always ask me though is, should I understand what it is that I'm reading? And my answer to that is, in the beginning, no, it doesn't matter whether you can understand every single word. That is really going to slow down your progress. Actually, what you need to be doing is simply learning, understanding, and practicing the pronunciation rules of Portuguese, and then testing yourself by reading something that you've never heard before and see if you can actually get all the right sounds in all the right places. And don't worry, if you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of pronunciation rules, then I've got you covered. I do have a free pronunciation guide that covers 7 of the most difficult sounds to master in Portuguese with native speaker audio accompaniment. So just visit the description and download that. It's going to help you tons. Another book series for beginners and improvers that is often recommended by my students is Storyglot. So these are written by Susana Moraes, who you may recognize from the Portuguese Lab YouTube channel. It's one of the OG channels, and this is what she has moved on to do. So these are quite beginner friendly because each book does have its own level. So for example, A1 or A2, and they do start short and simple. And what's great about these is that they will gradually introduce more grammar and complexity as you move through the story. So it's kind of like learning grammar as you go. They're quite fun and completely different to what I do, because obviously everything I do is rooted in real life discussions and conversations here in Portuguese, but these are all quite mystical and fantastical. So if you like that kind of thing, you'll probably love these. Each story does include an English translation and notes and audio, so you can work on a lot of skills with these actually. So these are a really firm favorite among my students. A similar series is Contos com Nível by Ana Sousa Martins. They do have a lot of stories in these. The A1 book has 20 stories, the A2 story has 17, and there are even exercises after each story as well. So if pronunciation and grammar are what you are looking to train, then these recommendations should really help. So what about building vocabulary? Which are the apps that I recommend for that? Well, I do have a whole video on apps that I most recently recommend over here that you can check out next. I'll link it in the description. But notable mention this time goes to Drops. This is really great as a complete beginner because it does start with single words and it has a small picture. And so you can really start to learn vocabulary and the gender with words, which is a very important tip that I give you in my free lesson for beginners. So if you haven't watched it, go and watch it because it's full of really important tips like that. Then as you get more experience, of course, it will get more difficult. It will move on to giving you short phrases that you can use in simple conversations. And if you choose to upgrade to the premium version, it's got even more features. So quizzes, an audio only mode for your car. I know lots of you love to practice your Portuguese while you're driving in the car. It will even collect all of the vocabulary that you have been learning in a nice, neat little folder. So what about training your listening skills? Well, once again, this channel is a fountain of knowledge for that. I just published 2 videos recently on this because it can be really tricky to find content that will help you improve your listening when you're a complete beginner, right? You don't understand much yet. So actually listening is one of the hardest things you can try and practice. So again, check those videos out next. And in one of them, I actually invite you to my live sessions with my students to do a listening challenge with us because we set one of these every month. So if you want to test your listening skills, that would be a really great one to check out. But of course, somewhere really obvious you can turn to is podcasts and TV. Let's start with some podcasts. Slow Portuguese with Maria is a really cool resource. Each episode is around 10 minutes long, and just as you would expect, Maria speaks nice and slowly, so you can follow the topic of the day, which ranges from telling you about a trip she has coming up to talking about her day yesterday, or even explaining a specific grammar rule. If you'd like to try something more topical, I always say to my students, find something that you are interested in. If you love music or food, then find resources that you can use that will cover those topics. So one topical podcast recommended by my lovely student Dina is História do Dia by O Observador, which she says is a wonderful option because you get daily news interviews about current events. So you can find it on any of your podcast providers. And of course, the great thing about podcasts, if you are using an app like Spotify, for example, is you can actually slow the audio down. So if you were to slow it down to about 75%, then you'll probably be able to understand much more. So again, these are quite short. Episodes are never more than about 20 minutes. So this might be a good one to check out and test yourself. On to TV shows. So there are now several Portuguese language options on streaming platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime. So some of the favorites among my students have been Até que a Vida Nos Separe and Rabo de Peixe on Netflix. To be honest, these shows kind of jump around a bit in terms of which streaming platform that you can find them on, but those are a couple of titles that they have loved, along with Pôr do Sol. And there is a new one that is recently on streaming platforms, I believe it's on Prime at the moment, called Vizinhos para Sempre. Now, I will say that using TV shows like this are going to be much harder to train your Portuguese listening skills, especially if you're at the very beginning of your journey, because as I mentioned in this video that I did recently about listening skills, when you're watching something for 30 minutes or longer, we call that extensive listening. And the best that you can hope for when you're doing extensive listening is to just pick up some words here and there and be getting used to kind of the rhythms and the sounds of the language rather than being able to keep up with actually what's being said. It's still a helpful exercise and lots of people do enjoy this, so why not add it to your menu of things to do when you're learning? Another genre that my students love for extensive listening is quiz shows. So I know that lots of my students, for example, love watching O Preço Certo. Again, it's going to be very hard for you to actually follow everything that's going on, but you are going to be able to pick out a few things here and there and just generally train your ears to listening to Portuguese. And the great thing that I always say about well-known quiz shows or well-known reality TV shows is that there's no complex plot for you to try and keep up with in terms of understanding exactly what's going on. They're usually quite exaggerated and the format is very familiar, so you are more likely to understand what's going on in these shows. So I would definitely recommend doing that. Finally, a couple of noteworthy websites. One website that my students love is called Linguno, and they actually do a daily Portuguese crossword. This is so cool. It comes in all sorts of different levels, so you can test different things. So even if you're a complete beginner, you can do this, and it's going to test you on vocabulary, and you'll have to fill in the crossword. Something else my students have loved is Daily Nata. Now, this did start as like a daily email service where you would receive a short little text with some explanation and exercises, but it has grown into a bigger platform now and does have a premium version where you can access all sorts of content. So this has been something that they have really, really loved. And that's a wrap on today's video. I hope that these resources will help you take the next step towards feeling more confident and connected in your new life here in Portugal. And if you're just getting started and think, hang on, I am not ready for these things yet, I need to start with the absolute basics, well, you are in luck because I do have a free workshop for beginners that will help you get to grips with pronunciation, understanding real life Portuguese as it's actually spoken on the the streets, and of course your intro to essential grammar. So you can sign up for it in the description. I would love to see you there. I'll be back next week with more tips and tutorials to improve your confidence and conversation skills in Portuguese, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a thing. Ciao for now.